throwaway account because my husband knows my main, but honestly, I don't care if he finds this. This is the story of how I spent 5 years systematically destroying the man who tried to ruin my life. To understand why I did what I did, you need to know who I am. My name is Olivia. I'm 34, and I am, or rather, I was the CEO of a rapidly growing tech logistics firm. I don't say that to brag, I say it because it's the only thing that mattered to me outside of my marriage. I built this company from absolute zero. I'm talking 18-hour days in a freezing garage, surviving on instant noodles, and coding until my eyes bled. It was my baby. And 5 years ago, we were finally on the verge of our initial public offering. We were going public, and I was about to secure generational wealth for my family. Enter Julian. Julian was the CEO of a rival logistics firm, but he didn't act like a competitor. He was a slick, charismatic guy in his late 40s who took me under his wing early on. He played the role of the proud, supportive mentor to perfection. We had dinners, talked strategy, and he even helped me navigate the complex legalities of preparing for an IPO. I trusted him completely. I viewed him as a close friend, almost like an older brother in a cutthroat industry where allies are hard to find. That was my first mistake. Exactly 3 weeks before our scheduled IPO date, the nightmare began. Our proprietary routing software, the literal crown jewel of our company that kept thousands of global supply chains moving efficiently, suffered a catastrophic, highly publicized security breach. It wasn't just a minor leak, it was a total system shutdown. Client data was exposed, shipments were frozen globally, and the media absolutely mauled us. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Major enterprise clients pulled their contracts within 48 hours. Wall Street investors panicked. Our projected stock valuation didn't just drop, it halved before we even had a chance to launch. I was forced to indefinitely postpone the IPO. Worse than the money, though, was the human cost. To keep the company afloat through the bleeding, I had to lay off 30% of my staff. These were people who had sacrificed their lives alongside me in that garage, and I had to look them in the eye and fire them. I nearly lost my mind over the next 6 months. I was working 20-hour days, fueled entirely by caffeine and pure, unadulterated stress, desperate to find the leak. Our internal audits turned up nothing. The breach looked flawless, like the work of an elite, anonymous state-sponsored hacker group. But flawless crimes don't exist. People get sloppy. 6 months after the crash, my brilliant head of IT uncovered a microscopic digital trail hidden deep within a decommissioned backup server. It was a single, misplaced line of code routing an encrypted data packet. When we traced it, it didn't lead to a dark web hacker collective. It pointed directly to a static IP address registered to a private holding company. A holding company owned entirely by Julian. I sat at my desk in the dark, staring at the glowing monitor, feeling the blood drain from my face. Julian hadn't just watched me drown, he was the one holding my head underwater. He had bribed a rogue developer on my own core engineering team, paid him a fortune to plant a digital backdoor, and deliberately tanked my valuation. The twisted part? 2 weeks after the breach, Julian had offered to, graciously, buy out my company for pennies on the dollar to save me the stress. It was a cold, calculated corporate execution. My hands were shaking. My immediate instinct was to call the FBI, to sue him into oblivion, to scream his betrayal from the rooftops. But then my analytical brain took over. Julian was a billionaire. He had an army of expensive, white-shoe lawyers who would tie up a lawsuit in appellate courts for a decade. He would bleed my remaining resources dry before a jury ever saw a single piece of evidence. A legal battle was exactly what he was prepared for. So, I decided to give him something he wasn't prepared for. I shut down my computer, walked out of the office, and drove home in complete silence. When I got inside, I called my husband into the kitchen. I poured myself a heavy glass of whiskey, took a sip, looked him dead in the eye, and said, I'm not going to sue him. I'm going to take everything he has. To pull off a revenge plan of this scale, you can't act out of anger. Anger makes you sloppy, and Julian was too smart for sloppy. I needed him to believe he had completely broken me. I needed him to feel so safe, so vastly superior, that he would never see me as a threat again. So, I put on the performance of a lifetime. A week after discovering his betrayal, I invited Julian to a quiet coffee shop downtown. I wore no makeup, dressed in oversized, slightly rumpled clothes, and let my eyes look heavy with exhaustion. When he sat down, looking every bit the polished, sympathetic mentor, I let the tears fall. I cried about how the breach had shattered my confidence. I told him I felt like a failure, that my spirit was broken, and that I didn't think I had the stomach for the tech world anymore. Julian absolutely ate it up. He patted my hand, offering hollow, condescending platitudes about how some people just aren't built for the harsh realities of the market. He then did exactly what I hoped he would do. He offered me a sympathy seat on one of his auxiliary advisory boards. He told me it would keep my mind active without the stress of running a company. I accepted with tearful gratitude. In reality, I had just secured a front-row seat to his inner workings. I was officially keeping my enemy closer than ever. With Julian neutralized by his own arrogance, I turned my attention back to my own office. My IT head had identified the mole, a mid-level developer named Marcus. My initial urge was to have him dragged out by security and blacklisted from the industry. But Marcus was far more useful to me employed. Instead of firing him, I called Marcus into my office and promoted him. I told him I was restructuring and needed someone I could trust to head a new, highly confidential R&D project. I moved his desk to an isolated wing of the building and gave him exclusive access to a secure server. What Marcus didn't know was that the server was a digital sandbox. Every piece of code, every design document, and every patent draft on that server was specially curated, which is a polite way of saying it was highly convincing, beautifully packaged garbage. For the next year, my core team and I engineered a masterpiece of sabotage. We created the blueprint for a revolutionary, next-generation logistics platform. On paper, it was flawless. It promised to cut supply chain overhead by 40% using an advanced, predictive AI routing matrix. But buried deep within the core architecture was a catastrophic, microscopic flaw, a logical loop that, once the system reached a specific volume of active users, would cause a cascading, irreversible memory leak, entirely freezing the platform. It was a digital time bomb. As expected, Marcus took the bait. Our network logs showed him downloading the files late at night. Within weeks, Julian's company began quietly filing patents that looked suspiciously identical to our sandbox project. Julian thought he was pulling off the heist of the century, stealing the ultimate tech right from under my nose while I sat quietly on his advisory board, playing the role of the defeated, fragile former rival. By year 3, Julian's company went completely all in on this stolen tech. He was so convinced that this platform would make him a multi-billionaire that he began aggressively expanding, desperate to launch before anyone else could catch up. But building a global platform requires massive capital, and Julian's liquid cash was tied up. To fund the rapid scale-up, he bypassed traditional banks and took out tens of millions of dollars in high-interest venture debt. This is where my husband came in. My husband is a high-net-worth wealth manager with deep connections in offshore finance. Under my direction, he quietly set up an anonymous shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Over the course of 18 months, this shell company began quietly purchasing Julian's debt slices from his original creditors. Julian was so distracted by the upcoming launch that he didn't care who held his debt, as long as the cash kept flowing. By the end of year 4, through a web of legal entities, my husband and I literally owned Julian's corporate liabilities, his secondary properties, and the massive mortgage on his flagship corporate headquarters. We held his entire life in our hands, and he didn't have a clue. While my husband secured the financial trap, I spent those same years dismantling Julian's professional support system from the inside. Using my position on his advisory board, I quietly befriended Julian's primary investors and key board members. I didn't badmouth him. Instead, I played the role of the humble, recovering businesswoman who only wanted to see her mentor succeed. I would take his board members out for lunches, offering them brilliant, highly objective market analyses. During these chats, I would subtly sow seeds of doubt. I'd point out Julian's increasingly erratic financial moves and raise gentle, highly technical questions about the stability of his new, unreleased platform. "I'm sure Julian knows what he's doing," I would say with a worried frown, but taking on that much high-interest debt for unproven architecture seems incredibly risky. I just hope the system doesn't buckle under high volume. By the end of year 4, the board trusted my business instincts and analytical mind far more than they trusted Julian's increasingly frantic, high-stress promises. They saw me as a grounded, brilliant strategist, and they saw Julian as a reckless gambler who was over-leveraged and obsessed with a single piece of tech. Finally, 5 years after the breach that almost destroyed me, Julian's new platform was fully built and ready for its global rollout. He was convinced he was about to become an industry titan and finally erase me from the board entirely. To celebrate his impending triumph, he hosted a massive, ultra-exclusive VIP launch party at a glass penthouse overlooking the city. He sent me a physical, gold-embossed invitation with a handwritten note, "To Olivia. Thanks for being there from the beginning. You won't want to miss this." He wanted to rub his success in my face. He wanted to watch me watch him win. I accepted the invitation, bought a stunning emerald green dress, and smiled in the mirror. The 5-year wait was finally over. The penthouse was suffocatingly opulent. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the glittering city skyline. Ice sculptures slowly melted into pools of expensive vodka, and champagne flowed from tower displays. Hundreds of tech elite, investors, and journalists filled the room. In the center of it all stood Julian, practically vibrating with arrogance. He was wearing a bespoke suit, holding a crystal glass of scotch, and flashing a brand-new, $100,000 platinum watch to anyone who would look. The moment I walked in wearing my emerald green dress, his eyes locked onto me. He excused himself from a group of venture capitalists and sashayed over, his smile practically dripping with condescending pity. "Olivia," he purred, raising his glass. "I'm so glad you could make it. It must be tough seeing all this, knowing what could have been." I offered him a soft, practiced smile. "It's quite a turnout, Julian. You must be very proud." He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a patronizing whisper. "I'll tell you what. Because I value our history, I'm willing to make you a one-time offer tonight. I'll buy your remaining logistical assets for pennies. It's a mercy pull, really. It's time to let the big boys run the industry, Olivia. You can finally retire, go plant a garden, and leave the heavy lifting to me." I didn't flinch. I didn't get angry. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, looked him dead in the eye, and glanced at my watch. It was 8:59 p.m. "You know, Julian," I said, my voice completely calm and clear. "You really should check your email." He frowned, his smug grin faltering for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" At exactly 9 p.m., a symphony of digital pings, buzzes, and ringtones erupted across the penthouse. It started with one board member's pocket, then another, and within 10 seconds, practically every high-level executive and investor in the room was staring at their phone screens in absolute horror. Julian's phone buzzed aggressively in his hand. I watched his eyes dart down to the screen. The first email was an urgent, automated alert from his engineering team. At 9 p.m. sharp, as his platform went live to the public, a massive, simulated high-volume traffic surge had been triggered. The fatal loop we had meticulously coded into the stolen tech 5 years ago had activated. The entire platform had suffered a cascading memory leak, freezing his system globally, deleting active client databases, and splashing a glaring, public vulnerability exploit page across their homepage for the entire tech world to see. Before he could even process the collapse of his life's work, a second alert popped up. It was a formal legal notice from our anonymous Cayman Islands holding company. Because his platform had just suffered a catastrophic system failure, his company had breached its solvency covenants. We were officially calling in his tens of millions of dollars in venture debt, effective immediately. We owned his debt, his office, and his home, and we were repossessing all of it. Then came the third blow. An email from his own legal department. A federal lawsuit had just been filed and delivered to his lawyers. It contained 5 years of meticulously documented, unassailable evidence of Julian's original corporate espionage against my company. I had spent the last month of my plan quietly cornering Marcus, the mole. When presented with the absolute proof of his treason, Marcus had wept, flipped, and signed a comprehensive, legally binding confession detailing every bribe Julian had ever paid him, complete with bank transfer receipts. In exchange, I had granted him immunity from prosecution, though, of course, I made sure his name was permanently entered into the federal court record. Julian's face went completely, utterly bloodless. The glass of scotch slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished concrete floor. He looked at the chaos erupting around his investors, then looked at me, his chest heaving in absolute terror. "You," he choked out, his voice trembling. "You did this." I stepped in close, so close I could smell the expensive cologne on his collar. I leaned in and whispered in his ear. "You thought I was weak because I cried in that coffee shop, Julian. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I realized I had to wait 5 years to do this." I turned on my heel and walked out of the penthouse, the sound of my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor as his world imploded behind me. The aftermath was beautiful. Julian's company declared Chapter 7 bankruptcy within 48 hours. Through our holding company, my husband and I acquired his entire corporate empire, his patents, and his assets for pennies on the dollar at the bankruptcy court. Marcus, the mole, was blacklisted so hard he will never even get a job servicing a printer, let alone writing code, for the rest of his life. My company is now the undisputed giant in the logistics space. Our IPO is back on track, and life has never been sweeter. My husband and I are currently drinking that same brand of whiskey on Julian's former yacht, which I bought at the liquidation auction. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes.